The voice was a whisper, a thread of sound so delicate it barely cut through the rich, yeasty warmth of the daily bread, a bakery that had anchored the corner of Elm Street for 50 years. It was late afternoon. Outside, the light was fading, a dull, bruised purple over the pavement. Elias Eli Kassim, the baker, a man whose face was a roadmap of exhaustion and flour dust, was wiping down the worn marble counter. He looked up, his movements freezing. Standing just inside the door, framed by the cold twilight, was a girl who couldn't be older than 7. Her coat was too big, a faded, mud-caked canvas that seemed to swallow her small frame. Her eyes, huge, liquid pools of brown, were fixed on his. They were the eyes of someone who had seen things no child should ever witness, ancient and terrified. A grimy, overstuffed backpack, a child's size but heavy with unseen weight, hung low on her back. Eli, a man who habitually avoided drama, felt a chilling, immediate knot of dread twist in his gut. This wasn't a runaway or a lost tourist. This was an entity of pure fear that had just walked into his shop. The air in the bakery, usually so comforting, now felt thick with an unspoken history, a heavy silence broken only by the persistent, rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet in the back room. Eli took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of cooling sourdough failing to calm his nerves. 2 other people were in the shop, Martha, a sharp-tongued, but kind-hearted woman known for her gossip and her loyalty to Eli's rye bread, and D.Z., a hulking construction worker with a scarred face, nursing a coffee after a double shift. Both stopped their quiet conversations at the sight of the girl. The contrast was stark, the cozy familiarity of the small-town bakery, the warm glow of the display case, the smell of cinnamon, the gentle murmur of the cooler, was violently contrasted by the child's desperate, alien presence. Martha's usual reaction would have been a loud, intrusive query. Instead, she just held a half-eaten Danish, her eyes widening, a silent question passing between her and Des. Des, a man whose hands knew only concrete and steel, shifted awkwardly, his protective instinct warring with his ingrained suspicion. The bakery regulars were a tough, cynical crowd, their empathy was a fragile, rarely displayed commodity. But the intensity of the little girl's plea, "Can you hide me?" had hit them with the force of a physical blow. They saw not a problem to be solved, but a vulnerability that needed shielding. Eli, recognizing the flicker of shared concern in their eyes, stepped from behind the counter, forcing his voice to be low and steady. He knew, intuitively, that any loud noise might shatter this fragile moment. A fleeting moment of shared decision passed between the 3 adults, a silent, collective understanding that whatever happened next, they were inextricably linked to this small, frightened passenger from the dark. Eli knelt down, bringing his large, flour-dusted face level with hers. "What's your name, sweetie?" he asked gently. Her mouth worked for a moment before the name came out, fragile and unfamiliar, Amani. "Amani," he repeated. "Why do you need to hide? Where are your parents?" Amani swallowed hard, her small chest heaving. "War," she whispered, the single syllable a devastating explanation for everything. "Syria. They paid a man. A bad man. He promised to take me to the abuelo in Istanbul, but he brought us here. He wants the money back." She didn't elaborate on how he wanted the money back, but the unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. As if to prove her point, Amani slid the backpack off her shoulders, her movements stiff with exhaustion and fear. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she reached into the front pocket and produced a single, weathered photograph. It was creased and worn from countless touches, a smiling couple, radiant under a bright sun, holding a much smaller, round-faced Amani. "My mama. My baba," she said, her voice cracking, her gaze locked on the image. "They told me to keep this. To remember why." Then, her eyes darting nervously toward the front window, she unzipped the heavy, mud-stained backpack. A low gasp escaped Martha's lips. Inside, resting against a rolled-up shawl and a half-empty bottle of water, was not a collection of toys or clothes, but a thick, leather-bound journal, and beside it, wrapped in a threadbare cloth, was a collection of old coins, not valuable but clearly significant, and a small, crudely carved wooden bird. But the most shocking item, the reason for the backpack's weight and Amani's terror, was a small, heavy sack tied with rough twine. It looked like a bag of sand, but the way Amani clutched it, The way it shifted felt heavier, denser than sand. It was a tangible piece of her past, a secret she had carried across a continent. The quiet, almost reverent awe of the adults gave way to a sudden, sickening jolt as the low thrum of an engine, too close and too slow, vibrated against the bakery's plate glass window. The engine sound was followed by the unmistakable, slow drag of heavy tires pulling up to the curb, then the thud of a car door closing. Des, moving with surprising speed for a man his size, glanced through the lace-curtained window. Black sedan. Tinted windows. Two guys. They look unfriendly, he muttered, his hand instinctively going to the small, decorative rolling pin Eli kept under the counter. Amani immediately recoiled, pressing herself against the base of the counter, her whole body shaking. The man, she breathed. The one who came with us. Eli knew this was it. The moment of decision. The moral tightrope walk. His business, his reputation, maybe even his safety, all against the raw, desperate need of a 7-year-old girl who had nothing left but the contents of her backpack. Martha, surprisingly, didn't hesitate. Back room, Eli. Now. Get her to the flour storage. Nobody goes in there. The two men who entered the bakery were slick, too polished for this part of town, with the cold, vacant eyes of hired muscle. The lead man, a tall, severe figure in an ill-fitting suit, scanned the room once, his gaze lingering on Martha and Des, dismissing them as background noise. He addressed Eli with a predatory smile. Bakery man. We're looking for a package. Small girl, Syrian, carrying a distinctive blue bag. Seen her? Eli, despite the adrenaline hammering in his chest, looked him dead in the eye. He felt a fierce, unexpected wave of protection for the child hiding just feet away. He straightened his apron, letting the flour dust on his hands create a thin cloud as he wiped them on his trousers. No children here, Eli said, his voice flat, emotionless. Only bread. You want a baguette? They're still warm. The man's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed, picking up the subtle tension in the room. He stepped closer to the counter, his expensive shoe scuffing the worn linoleum. Don't waste my time. The money she's carrying is mine. It was a deal. And deals are honored. His partner moved toward the back, his footsteps heavy. The threat was no longer verbal, it was physical, closing in on the place where Amani was hidden. The trio of protectors knew they had mere seconds to act. The heavy air of confrontation settled, a suffocating blanket that demanded a rupture, a sudden and violent release of the gathered pressure. As the second thug rounded the corner toward the back room, Des roared, a primal, unthinking sound, and slammed his heavy coffee mug onto the marble counter. The ceramic shattered with a loud, sharp crack. Hey! What's your problem, pal? Des challenged, moving to block the corridor, his massive frame suddenly looking less like a gentle giant and more like an immovable obstacle. The lead man, enraged by the delay, lunged for Eli, grabbing his arm. Where is she, you old fool? It was in that moment of chaos that Amani, driven by an instinct beyond her years, made her move. She didn't run or scream. She emerged silently from the shadow of the counter, walked straight past the struggling men, and stood directly in front of the lead thug. She held the small, heavy sack from her backpack, her eyes ablaze with a conviction that stopped the fight instantly. The money is here, she said, her voice surprisingly loud and clear, echoing in the sudden silence. But it is not yours. She walked to the counter, placed the sack down, and untied the twine. The thugs, Eli, Martha, and Des all leaned in, expecting to see a wad of rolled-up bills. Instead, the sack spilled open, revealing not money, but soil. Dark, rich, Syrian earth, mixed with fragments of shattered ceramic and a few small, tarnished metal military dog tags. Amani then picked up the wooden bird, holding it up like a piece of evidence. My father was a baker. He had money. But when the bomb hit the bakery, there was only this. He told me to carry the earth of our home so I would never forget. The coins are for the ferryman. The money you want is gone. The war ate it. Her unexpected, heartbreaking truth, the money was not cash, but symbolic weight, sapped the thug's momentum. The lead man blinked, his professional menace momentarily dissolving into confusion and sickened realization. He wasn't chasing a cash payout, he was chasing a ghost of a debt, a handful of dirt, and the trauma of a child. His partner, seeing his boss hesitate, paused awkwardly. The sheer, devastating symbolism of the contents of the backpack resolved the tension not with a punch, but with a paralyzing emotional truth. The sudden deflation of the threat left a hollow, ringing silence, a vacuum that desperately needed to be filled with the logistics of survival. Defeated not by force, but by the sheer, unassailable tragedy of a child's truth, the thugs exchanged a look of cold, professional disgust. They hadn't signed up for this kind of moral entanglement. The lead man spat once on the floor near the counter. "This isn't over, Baker," he growled, a hollow threat, before turning and retreating with his accomplice. They were gone as quickly as they arrived, the black sedan pulling away from the curb. Amani, the adrenaline fading, swayed on her feet and collapsed into Eli's arms, the wooden bird falling softly to the floor. She was safe, for now. The immediate, terrifying threat of the smugglers was gone. But as Eli held the feather-light body of the Syrian child, the second, more profound problem arose, heavy and vast, and now, where does she go? She was not an object to be protected temporarily, she was a human being now stranded. She was a ghost in the system, undocumented, alone, and miles from the promised grandfather. They had saved her from the criminals, but could they save her from the cold, impersonal machinery of the world? The instinct for defense gave way to the instinct for domesticity, the small, immediate needs of one tired girl beginning to override the enormity of the crisis. The next morning, the bakery became an unlikely sanctuary. The three hardened locals, Eli, Martha, and Des, formed a fragile, nonverbal pact of temporary custody. Amani slept on a makeshift cot in the back room, surrounded by sacks of flour, the scent of perverse comfort. Their transition from protectors to caregivers was clumsy and profoundly human. Eli, whose life revolved around precision baking, found himself wrestling with a simple can of alphabet soup, trying to make it appealing. Des, the man of few words, surprised everyone by producing a small, worn stuffed lion, a forgotten childhood toy he had kept, and left it silently beside Amani's cot. Martha, shedding her usual acid tongue, became a font of practical care, finding a change of clean, soft clothes from her granddaughter's closet and gently washing the dirt from Amani's hair, tears silently tracking through the flour dust on her own cheeks. The sight of Amani, small and tentative, carefully arranging her treasures, the photo, the earth, the bird, and now the lion, in a small corner, was the silent force that bound the three together. They had to learn how to deal with the quietness that was a symptom of her trauma. Amani didn't talk about the war, she talked about her father's bread, the smell of cardamom, and the games she used to play. They realized their task wasn't to fix her, but to provide a secure foundation. Eli rearranged his routine, closing the bakery an hour early to sit and help Amani trace the strange, beautiful letters of her name in Arabic in her notebook. Martha began leaving small, whimsical gifts, a ribbon, a brightly colored crayon. Des started fixing up the leaky faucet, making the back room a little less desolate. They were an absurd, unconventional family, the grumpy baker, the cynical town gossip, and the quiet, scarred construction worker, all united by one 7-year-old Syrian girl. They had each been emotionally isolated before Amani arrived. Now, they found their shared humanity in the meticulous, patient process of giving her back her childhood. The quiet, beautiful world they had built was a delicate thing, however, and the intrusion of the official world, the system, was inevitable and soon to come. The fragile peace was shattered 2 weeks later when the Department of Child and Family Services, DCFS, arrived. The police had finally connected the dots from the earlier incident with the thugs to the undocumented child. A judge and a stern social worker, Ms. Davies, sat in Eli's cramped, flour-dusted office. "Mr. Kassem," the judge stated, his voice a drone of procedural bureaucracy, "we understand you and your associates acted with commendable instinct. However, Amani is an unaccompanied minor, undocumented, and trauma-affected. Your background is a baker. Mr. Dez's record isn't exactly clean. And Ms. Martha, well, she's not immediate family." Ms. Davies' report was clinical and damning. The bakery was not a registered home. The caretakers were unconventional, their approach unorthodox. The debate hinged on the oldest question: was institutional safety better than unconventional, messy love? Eli, who had never felt comfortable articulating his emotions, spoke with a clarity that surprised even Martha. Your system sees paperwork and risk. I see a child who carries her home in a bag of dirt. We are unconventional, yes. But we are also the only constant she's had since she lost everything. She isn't just surviving here. She's beginning to live. The judge was unmoved. We need stability, Mr. Kassem. A family unit. A proper structure. It was Amani who broke the stalemate. She was sitting quietly in a chair, clutching her wooden bird. She stood up, walked to the judge, and presented her backpack. She didn't speak a word of legal defense. Instead, she took the man's large hand, led him to the kitchen, and pointed to a tray of small, freshly baked bread rolls, each one perfectly shaped. Eli made them, she said softly, speaking in clear, almost perfect English she had been practicing. But I helped. He taught me the secret. The secret is not the flour. It is the waiting. It is the warmth. Then, she looked up at Ms. Davies. I am safe here. They do not forget me. They are my family now. They are my bread. Her simple, profound testimony, the language of baking is the language of love, was the emotional climax. It wasn't about legal documents, it was about the palpable, undeniable, shared warmth of a functioning, albeit non-traditional, household. The cold, hard logic of the law found itself suddenly up against the irresistible force of a child's heart, a collision that could only result in one decision. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, a slow, thoughtful realization dawning in his eyes. He looked at Eli, whose calloused hands had made a world of difference. He looked at Des, who shifted uncomfortably but stood tall. He looked at Martha, whose hard face was softened with fierce devotion. He saw not a group of misfits, but a cohesive, fighting unit. The court will issue a temporary guardianship order, the judge finally decreed, his voice low and firm. Contingent on weekly oversight and a formal application for full, non-traditional foster custody, we recognize that removing Amani from this environment would cause more trauma than stability. The sigh of relief in the small office was a collective exhalation of pure catharsis. Eli was stunned. He hadn't just saved a girl, he had accidentally created a family. The group was now a legal, if highly provisional, unit. Amani didn't understand the legal terms, but she understood the finality of the judge's smile. She ran and hugged Eli, burying her face in his flowery apron. Des gave a rare, genuine smile, and Martha finally let the tears of relief come, pulling Amani into a crushing embrace. The girl was home. The closure was only a beginning, the end of the escape giving way to the slow, inspiring work of building a life together. The daily bread had changed. It was still the same familiar corner bakery, but the name on the main sign now read, The Daily Bread and Amani's Sweet Shop. Amani, now 9 years old, was a whirlwind of energy. She no longer spoke in whispers. She was the bakery's cheerful ambassador, greeting customers with a confident smile. She had, in fact, turned out to have a magical touch with pastry, her small hands deftly shaping sweet Syrian ma'amol cookies alongside Eli's sourdough. The group had transformed. Eli had shed 20 pounds of stress and gained a lightness in his step. Martha, the eternal gossip, now ran a small, informal neighborly nest network, using her contacts to help other at-risk families in the community. Des, now known around town as Uncle Des, had left construction and was Eli's full-time delivery driver and maintenance man, keeping the bakery and Amani's life safe and sound. Amani had kept her backpack. It was cleaned and sat proudly on a shelf in her small bedroom in the apartment above the bakery, a constant, silent reminder of her journey. The heavy bag of Syrian earth was used to plant a small, vibrant fig tree in the backyard, a tiny piece of the old world taking root in the new. Amani had finally reached her destination. Her grandfather, the abuelo, was found in Istanbul, but after a heartbreaking, tearful video call, he had given his blessing. Her parents wanted her to be safe, he had said, and she is safe. With you. You are her family now. The small community, initially cynical, had been forced to look past their own hardened edges and see the simple, profound act of grace unfolding in their local bakery. It became a hub of genuine human connection. The lesson, whispered over countless cups of coffee and loaves of warm bread, was simple, yet profound, an anthem of the human spirit carried across continents by a small child. You don't need money or a map to carry your home, you only need a soft heart and enough space to let life rise.